These are the new 2016 iPhones, the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 7 Plus. And back in September when they came out, I did 2 ultimate speed tests between the iPhone 7, the iPhone 7 Plus, and also last year's iPhone 6s. But I haven't actually compared them to any other smartphones. So hey everyone, welcome to the ZONEofTECH, I'm Daniel, and welcome to my ultimate speed test series, a series in which I test everything in depth when it comes to performance, so everything from the specs to the Apple on speed test, to RAM management, CPU performance, GPU performance, JavaScript performance, 4K video editing performance, Wi-Fi performance, a fingerprint speed test, and basically everything is covered in this video. And in this episode, I'll be doing the ultimate speed test between the iPhone 7 and Samsung's flagship for 2016, the Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge. Enjoy. Okay, so let's start off with the specs first. So the S7 Edge comes with the Exynos 8890, which is an octa-core processor. Well, basically it has 2 quad-core processors inside. So a 2.3 GHz high-performance quad-core processor, and then also a 1.6 GHz low-performance or low-energy processor, and this is also a quad-core one. Now the iPhone 7, on the other hand, this one comes with the Apple A10 Fusion chip, which is finally a quad-core processor. So the Apple A10 has 2 2.34 GHz high-performance cores, and also 2 low-performance or low-energy cores. Now we don't know the exact frequency of the low-performance cores, but expect something pretty similar to what we have on the S7. Oh, and by the way, it seems that Geekbench and other benchmarking apps, they see the Apple A10 as a dual-core processor, so they only see the 2 high-performance cores. Now, in terms of the RAM, we have 4 GB of RAM on the S7 Edge and 2 GB of RAM on the iPhone 7. The iPhone 7 Plus comes with 3 GB of RAM, by the way, so I might be covering that in a separate video. But yeah, just by looking at the specs, the S7 seems to simply blow the iPhone 7 out of the water. Now let's move on to the actual tests, starting off with the simplest test of all, the boot test. And before starting this test, I just want to mention that both phones have been wiped clean, and they both have exactly the same apps, and they're also both 32GB models. And I've also removed the SD card, the micro SD card inside the S7, and that's because this one can actually slow down the phone, especially when it comes to apps that are being run from the SD card storage. I've closed all the apps running in the background on both phones, so all the tests should be as fair as possible. So let's boot the phones up, 3, 2, 1, go. And speeding this up, it seems that the iPhone 7 is indeed the first one to boot up, followed by the S7 Edge, which was about 12 seconds after. Now moving on to test number 3, I'm going to do the Apple on speed test, and this is actually a pretty hard thing to do considering that you have 2 very different mobile operating systems. So I'm obviously not going to test any system apps, that would be pointless. I'm only going to test some apps that are available on both platforms, so Chrome, Twitter, Instagram, some games, and more. The only system app that I am going to test is the camera app. This is something that I really want to try out, and this is also an app that's really used on both phones. So again, I've closed all the apps running in the background on both phones, so let's start off with Twitter first. So 3, 2, 1, go. And it seems that Twitter loaded a bit faster on the S7 Edge. Not a big difference though. iPhone 7 was closely behind, so let's try something else. Let's try Instagram now. So 3, 2, 1, go. And again, it seems to load first on the S7 Edge, and yeah, the iPhone was still about 1 second slower, so not a big difference, but still, the S7 Edge was indeed faster. Now let's try the first non-multi-platform app, the camera app. This one was basically the same on both. On the S7 it did launch a tiny bit quicker, but that's because of the long app launch animation on the iPhone. But then when it came to taking shots, the iPhone was so much faster here. Now keep in mind that I had no light here, so both cameras had to decrease the shutter speed, but take a look at how much faster the iPhone 7 takes the shots. Now let's move on to some more demanding apps. So first off, let's try Pokemon Go. So 3, 2, 1, Pokemon Go. And this one seems to launch quite a bit quicker on the iPhone 7, so this is a full 4-second difference. Again, 4 seconds doesn't seem like a big deal, but this all adds up in time. Moving on to some more demanding 3D games, Temple Run 2, and again, the iPhone 7 loaded it first, and interesting enough, we actually have the exact same 4-second difference between the two. And yeah, the game looks very fluid on both. On the iPhone, it's definitely running at 60 frames per second. On the S7 Edge, it does seem a bit under, so maybe 50 to 55, but maybe that's just me. Okay, so now let's move on to one of the most demanding 3D games out there, at least when it comes to multi-platform games, so Dead Trigger 2. 3, 2, 1, Pokemon Go. And the app seems to launch first on the iPhone 7, and again, we have the exact same 4-second difference, so this is actually really interesting. So now let's start off the game in 3, 2, 1, go. I'm not gonna say Pokemon Go anymore. So let's see which one is gonna load it first. It seems that the iPhone 7 has already loaded a game. The S7 is still loading, and the S7 has finally finished about 8 seconds later. Again, not a massive difference, but every second does add up in time. Now there are a couple of more multi-platform apps that I want to test out. So let's try BBC News. So 3, 2, 1, go. And the iPhone loaded this one a tiny bit quicker, but that was actually less than a second difference. So this one was very minor. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to open a bunch of websites on both smartphones, the exact same pages, the same links on both. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm actually using Chrome on the iPhone. So Safari is even better optimized than Chrome, and I basically wanted to give the S7 Edge a better chance. And this test is not part of my app opening speed test, since the phones are basically rubbing each other's bandwidth. They're on the same Wi-Fi network, so this won't be a fair test. However, I am going to use this in my RAM management test and see how many pages these phones manage to keep open in the background. So as you can see, I've opened a ton of web pages, exactly the same ones on both. Finally, let's try YouTube, and it loaded first on the iPhone 7 and about 1 to 2 seconds later on the S7 Edge. Now let me just look for my channel and go to my iPhone 7 unboxing and first impressions videos, and it seems that the iPhone 7 loaded the video first. And again, this is not an accurate test because they're on the same Wi-Fi network. I'm mostly doing this in order to test the RAM management in the next test. So speaking of the next test, let's move on to test number 4, the RAM management test. Okay, so I'm now going to open all the apps running in the background and see which phone has better RAM management. Keep in mind that the S7 comes with 4 GB of RAM, whereas the iPhone 7 only comes with 2 GB, so basically half the amount of the S7 Edge. So the S7 Edge should theoretically smoke the iPhone when it comes to keeping apps open in the background, but let's see if that's actually true. So let's start off with YouTube, and it seems that YouTube is still open on both phones. Now let's move on to the first app that I've opened, Twitter, and it seems that, actually no, both phones actually had to load Twitter again. So it seems that the S7 with 4 GB of RAM didn't manage to keep Twitter open. Now let's try something else. Let's try the most demanding app that I have opened, that Trigger 2. And whoa, take a look at this. The iPhone still has it running in the background, and it's actually fully playable. This was by far the most demanding app, whereas the S7 Edge seems to, well, the S7 Edge still has to load it. This is really impressive. The iPhone 7 only has 2 GB of RAM, and the iPhone 7 basically already won the RAM management test. But just in case, let's just try a few more apps. So let's try the BBC News app. This one seems to still be open on both the iPhone 7 and the S7 Edge. Okay, now let's try Temple Run 2, and it seems that this one still has to reload on both phones. So neither of them managed to keep it open in the background, and now I'm going to open up Chrome and see if all these websites that I've opened before are still there. So 925 Google first, and whoa, this is still open on the iPhone, and yeah, it does have to reload on the S7. Now let's try a different website, so let's try the Elon Musk Mars article. Who's going to Mars? I definitely am. Well, not really, at least not yet. But yeah, this one seems to still be open on the iPhone, and again, it seems to still have to reload on the S7 Edge. So let's just try one more page, TechCrunch. And again, it's still there on the iPhone, and it still has to reload on the S7. So when it comes to RAM management, the iPhone 7 surprisingly won, even though it only has half the amount of RAM on the S7. So seems that apps run much better on iOS than they do on Android, especially on the S7 with TouchWiz. They're so much better optimized on the iPhone than on the S7, and RAM management seems to work so well. Okay, so now I'm going to close all the apps running in the background, and let's move on to the actual benchmarks. So starting off with Geekbench 4 in 3, 2, 1, go. So I'm going to speed this up, and the iPhone 7 has finished the test in actually less than 3 minutes and got a score of 3484 for the single core score and 5552 for the multi-core one. This is really impressive actually, especially when it comes to the single core score. Now the S7 is still going, and it seems that the S7 Edge has finished a full 2 minutes after the iPhone 7. And whoa, just take a look at these scores. 1784 for the single core one, that's almost half the score of the iPhone 7. And in terms of the multi-core score, even though the S7 does come with a quad-core high-performance processor, and the iPhone 7 only has a dual-core high-performance processor, the iPhone 7 still outperformed the S7, even when it came to multi-core. So no words here. Very impressive result when it comes to the iPhone 7. This simply shows that specs on paper basically mean nothing in the end. It's the real-world performance that matters. And just to give you an idea, this is actually faster than a 2015 MacBook Air, faster than a 12-inch MacBook, even faster than a 12.9 inches iPad Pro, and at least when it comes to the single core scores, it was even faster than my late 2013 MacBook Pro 15-inch that actually comes with a quad-core i7 Haswell processor. Yeah, that one scored 3454 versus the iPhone 7, which scored 3484, so very impressive results on the iPhone 7's part. Next up, I'm going to run an Antutu benchmark. Now on the iPhone 7 at launch, this one actually kept crashing over and over. Now it has finally been updated for iPhone 7 and iPhone 7 Plus support, however I don't actually have an iPhone 7 anymore. I only have my iPhone 7 Plus, so I'm going to do this test, the Antutu benchmark test with my iPhone 7 Plus, which does come with 3GB of RAM versus 2GB like we have on the iPhone 7, and a 1080p display versus a 768p display. And the iPhone 7 Plus has finished the test first, and then the S7 Edge actually finished 1 minute later, and the scores aren't that much different to be honest. So it seems that the iPhone basically won in every single category from 3D to user experience, CPU, and even RAM. I mean, at least in the RAM section, the S7 should have won because, well, it comes with 4GB of RAM versus 3. But yeah, it seems that the RAM on the iPhone is indeed higher clocked than on the S7. Now moving on to the GPU benchmarks, I'm going to run an iStorm Unlimited test first. So this is a 720p on-screen test, so since it's 720p, it won't actually matter that the S7 Edge has a Quad HD display. Speeding this up, and it seems that the iPhone 7 has finished the test first, and the S7 Edge was actually 3 minutes slower than the iPhone. However, it seems that iStorm Unlimited actually ran off-screen on the iPhone and on-screen on the S7 Edge. And taking a look at the scores, it seems that the iPhone 7 was more than twice more powerful than the S7 Edge. Okay, so let's do a couple of more GPU tests. So I'm now going to run a 3D Mark slingshot test. This is run at 1080p off-screen, and I'm going to run this in OpenES 3.0 on both devices. And same as with the last test, the iPhone 7 did finish first and got a score of 2374, while the S7 Edge got 2202, so not a massive difference here. However, in terms of the actual frames per second, the iPhone had an average of 27.59 for the first test, while the S7 Edge had 13.3, so actually half of what the iPhone had. So yeah, pretty big difference in the end. Now let's move on and do some different GPU tests, starting off with GFXBench. So the first test that I'm going to run is an on-screen Manhattan test. So this one renders in OpenES 3.0 on both devices and also at the device's native resolution. And the iPhone 7 did finish first and got a score of 3632 frames, so that's actually an average of 58, and the S7 Edge finished just a few seconds after and got a score of 27 frames per second or 1678 frames. So that's a pretty big difference, more than double the frames per second on the iPhone, but keep in mind that the S7 Edge did have to render everything at native resolution, so at 2560 by 1440, while the iPhone 7 only had to render this in 768p. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to run the same Manhattan OpenES 3.0 benchmark, but now I'm actually going to run it in 1080p off-screen. So being off-screen means that it's actually independent of the device's resolution. And the test is finished, and as you can see, both smartphones got some much higher results than before. So on the iPhone 7 we have 62 frames per second from 58, and on the S7 Edge we actually have 41 now, up from 27, so that's a massive difference, especially on the S7 Edge. But in the end, even off-screen, the iPhone 7 was still 21 frames ahead of the S7 Edge, which is still a pretty massive difference. So if you game a lot, well, the iPhone 7 is a much better choice. Now moving on to some different kind of benchmarks, I'm going to run a couple of JavaScript benchmarks now. So the first one that I'm going to run is SunSpider JavaScript. This one basically tests the JavaScript performance of the browser, and I'm going to run this in the device's best performing browser, so Safari on the iPhone and Google Chrome on the S7 Edge. And the iPhone 7 has finished first in 188 milliseconds, while the S7 Edge on Chrome finished in 482 milliseconds, so whoa, the iPhone was actually 2.5 times faster than the S7 Edge. But you know what, let me just try this on Chrome on the iPhone. Let's see how Chrome performs on the iPhone. And Chrome is finished, and wait, what's 187 milliseconds? That's actually 1 millisecond faster than on Safari, so that's kind of weird. But yeah, even with Chrome, the iPhone 7 is so much faster than the S7 when it comes to JavaScript performance. Now, I also want to run Google Octane, which is another kind of JavaScript benchmark, and the iPhone 7 did finish first, getting a score of 26,300, and the S7 Edge got a score of 10,629, so yeah, again, more than double the JavaScript performance on the iPhone. Finally, moving away from all the CPU and GPU benchmarks, let's actually test out the Wi-Fi performance. Now, just out of curiosity, I'm just going to run the same test on both devices at the same time, just to see which one manages to take the most bandwidth. And then I will be running them separately on each phone. So after running them at the same time, we got a download speed of 50.13 megabits per second download speed on the iPhone 7 and 93 on the S7 Edge. So that's a pretty big difference, and 76 and 66 on the upload side. Yeah, some pretty big differences, but now if we run this test separately, we basically get the exact same scores with some really minor differences on the upload side. So yeah, Wi-Fi performance does seem to be pretty similar on both. Number 14, I'm going to do a test that some of you have been waiting for quite a while, a fingerprint speed test. Let's test and see which one has a faster fingerprint scanner. Now first, I just want to enable rest finger to unlock on the iPhone. Otherwise, with iOS 10 you actually have to click the home button to unlock it, so this would make it much easier to test. Okay, so let's try this with the screen turned on first. And it seems that the S7 does unlock faster than the iPhone, and that's because there's simply no unlock animation on the S7 Edge. It basically goes straight to the home screen. On the iPhone, however, you have to wait about a second or two for the animation to finish. Now let's try this with the screen turned off now, and it seems that the iPhone does indeed unlock first this time. Now I recorded these shots separately and I did sync them afterwards, and even though it's hard to tell, I did actually click on the home button at the exact same time. And the iPhone, when the screen was turned off at least, seems to unlock first. And finally, let's finish this ultimate speed test the way it basically started, with a boot test. So let's boot these devices off and see which one does actually turn off first. So 3, 2, 1. Pokemon Go. And yeah, there's no indicator on the iPhone. The only way you can tell that the iPhone is off now is by pressing the home button. The home button won't actually give you any feedback when the device has turned off. But yeah, basically they did turn off at about almost the same time. The S7 Edge was indeed the first to turn off, about 1 to 2 seconds faster. Okay, so in the end, what's my conclusion in all this? Well, basically in every single test, even when it came to RAM management, the iPhone 7 heavily outperformed the S7 Edge. Now, to be honest, I was expecting the iPhone to win, but I wasn't expecting it to win in every single category, at least not by this much. The S7 Edge is indeed a really fast and also a really premium smartphone, and most of its slowness and RAM management issues have quite a lot to do with TouchWiz itself. So I'll have a Google Pixel versus iPhone 7 ultimate speed test soon, so definitely feel free to subscribe if you want to see that. I'm really curious to see how a stock Android device such as the Google Pixel, which in the end is the fastest Android smartphone out there, how the Google Pixel would actually compare to the iPhone 7. Also, if you have enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a like to let me know. It took me a really long time to make, since I actually wanted to have every single test included in this video instead of doing separate tests for something like a fingerprint reader or RAM management and so on. I do think it's more organized and more enjoyable for you to watch than doing those tests separately. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Other than that, also feel free to follow me on Twitter at ZONEofTECH for more tech updates there as well. You can ask me any questions, any tech related questions there as well. And also let me know in the comments if you were epic enough to make it to the end, to this point of the video. Other than that, don't forget to enable notifications on my channel on both desktop and mobile. On mobile by simply tapping on that bell icon next to my channel so that you're actually notified whenever I upload a brand new epic video. There's quite a lot of issues with the subscription feeds, so definitely have notifications enabled if you don't want to miss out on my next video. But yeah, this was pretty much it for this video, so again, huge thanks to every single one of you that made it to the end, to this point of the video. I'm Daniel, and I'll see you guys in my next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out. Cheers.